All right, hello. VOX tonight, continuing The Wood Beyond the World with Chapter 6. One moment, please. We got a cat. There's a cat here. Cat on the stream. Here, let me pick him up. Did I say anything, Bill? $100 bill. You're on stream, $100 bill. All right. Funny fella. All right. After that cat cameo. Okay, I don't know. Does he want something? My cat is here, and I think he wants something. Maybe. Nah. He's amusing himself. Let's get started. Chapter 6. The old man tells Walter of himself. Walter sees a shard in the cliff wall. When they had done their meat and drink, But when they had done their meat and drink, the master and the shipmen went about the watering of the ship, and the others strayed off along the meadow, so that presently Walter was left alone with the carle, and fell to speech with him, and said, Father, meseemeth thou shouldst have some strange tale to tell, and as yet we have asked thee of naught save meat for our bellies. Now if I ask thee concerning thy life, and how thou camest hither, and abided here, wilt thou tell me aught? The old man smiled on him, and said, Son, my tale were long to tell, and mayhappen concerning much thereof my memory should fail me, and withal there is grief therein, which I were loath to awaken. Nevertheless, if thou ask, I will answer as I may, and in any case will tell thee naught save the truth. Said Walter, Well then, hast thou been long here? Yea, said the carle, since I was a young man, and a stalworth knight. Said Walter, This house, didst thou build it, and raise these garths, and plant orchard and vineyard, and gather together the neat and the sheep, or did some other do all this for thee? Said the carle, I did none of this. There was one here before me, and I entered into his inheritance. And as though this were a lordly manor, with a fair castle thereon, and all well stocked and plenished. Said Walter, Didst thou find thy foregoer alive here? Yea, said the elder. Yea, where was I? Yea, said the elder. Yet he lived but for a little while after I came to him. He was silent a while, and then he said, I slew him. Even so would he have it, though I bade him a better lot. Said Walter, Didst thou come hither of thine own will? Mayhappen, said the carle. Who knoweth? Now have I no will to do either this or that. It is want that maketh me do, or refrain. Said Walter, Tell me this, why didst thou slay the man? Did he any scathe to thee? Said the elder, When I slew him, I deemed that he was doing me all scathe. But now I know that it was not so. Thus it was. I would needs go where he had been before, and he stood in the path against me, and I overthrew him, and I went on the way as I would. What came thereof? Said Walter. Evil came of it, said the carle. Then was Walter silent a while, and the old man spake nothing. But there came a smile in his face that was both sly and somewhat sad. Walter looked on him and said, Was it from hence that thou wouldst go that road? Yea, said the carle. Said Walter, And now wilt thou tell me what that road was, whither it went, and whereto it led, that thou must needs wend it, though thy first stride were over a dead man? I will not tell thee, said the carle. Then they held their peace, both of them, and thereafter got on to other talk of no import. So wore the day till night came, and they slept safely. And on the morrow, after they had broken their fast, the more part of them set off with the carle to the hunting, and they went, all of them, 3 hours faring towards the foot of the cliffs, which was all grown over with coppice, hazel, and thorn, with here and there a big oak or ash tree. There it was, said the old man, where the venison was most and best. Of their hunting need not be said, saving that when the carle had put them back on the track of the deer and shown them what to do, he came back again with Walter, who had no great lust for the hunting, and sorely longed to have some more talk with the said carle. He, for his part, seemed not loth thereto, and so led Walter to a mound or hillock amidst the clear of the plain, whence all was to be seen save where the wood covered it. But just before where they now lay down, there was no wood, save low bushes betwixt them and the rock wall. And Walter noted that whereas otherwhere, save in one place whereto their eyes were turned, the cliffs seemed well nigh or quite sheer, or indeed in some places beetling over. In that said place they fell away from each other on either side. And before this sinking was a slope or scree that went gently up toward the sinking of the wall. Walter looked long and earnestly at this place, and spake not, till the carle said, What? Thou hast found something before thee to look on. What is it then? Quoth Walter, Some would say that where yonder slopes run together up towards that sinking in the cliff wall, there will be a pass into the country beyond. The carle smiled and said, Yea, son, nor, so saying, would they err, for that is the pass into the Bear country, whereby those huge men come down to chaffer with me. Yea, said Walter, and therewith he turned him a little, and scanned the rock wall, and saw how a few miles from that pass it turned somewhat sharply toward the sea, narrowing the plain much there, till it made a bight, the face whereof looked well nigh north instead of west, as did the more part of the wall. And in the midst of that northern-looking bight was a dark place, which seemed to Walter like a downright shard in the cliff. For the face of the wall was of a bleak grey, and it was but little furrowed. So then Walter spake, Lo, old friend, there yonder is again a place that meseemeth is a pass. Whereunto doth that one lead? And he pointed to it, but the old man did not follow the pointing of his finger, but, looking down on the ground, answered confusedly, and said, Maybe, I wot not. I deem that it also leadeth into the Bear country by a roundabout road. It leadeth into the far land. Walter answered not, for a strange thought had come uppermost in his mind, that the carle knew far more than he would say of that pass, and that he himself might be led thereby to find the wondrous three. He caught his breath hardly, and his heart knocked against his ribs, but he refrained from speaking for a long while. But at last he spake in a sharp, hard voice, which he scarce knew for his own. Father, tell me, I adjure thee by God and all hallows, was it through yonder shard that the road lay, when thou must needs make thy first stride over a dead man? The old man spake not a while. Then he raised his head, and looked Walter full in the eyes, and said in a steady voice, No, it was not. Thereafter they sat looking at each other a while. But at last Walter turned his eyes away, but knew not what they beheld nor where he was, but he was as one in a swoon. For he knew full well that the carle had lied to him, and that he might as well have said aye as no, and told him that it verily was by that same shard that he had stridden over a dead man. Nevertheless, he made as little semblance thereof as he might, and presently came to himself, and fell to talking of other matters that had naught to do with the adventures of the land. But after a while he spake suddenly, and said, My master, I was thinking of a thing. Yea, of what? Said the carle. Of this, said Walter, that here in this land be strange adventures toward, and that if we, and I in especial, were to turn our backs on them, and go home with nothing done, it were pity of our lives, for all will be dull and deedless there. I was deeming it were good if we tried the adventure. What adventure? Said the old man, rising up on his elbow and staring sternly on him. Said Walter, that wending yonder pass to the eastward, whereby the huge men come to thee from out of the Bear country, that we might see what should come thereof. The carle leaned back again, and smiled and shook his head, and spake, That adventure were speedily proven, death would come of it, my son. Yea, and how? Said Walter. The carle said, The big men would take thee, and offer thee up as a blood offering to that woman who is their Mahomet. And if ye go all, then shall they do the like with all of you. Said Walter, Is that sure? Dead sure, said the carle. How knowest thou this? Said Walter. I have been there myself, said the carle. Yea, said Walter, but thou camest away whole. Art thou sure thereof? Said the carle. Thou art alive yet, old man, said Walter, for I have seen thee eat thy meat which ghosts use not to do. And he laughed. But the old man answered soberly, If I escaped, it was by this, that another woman saved me, and not often shall that befall. Nor wholly was I saved. My body escaped, forsooth, but where is my soul? Where is my heart and my life? Young man, I rede thee, try no such adventure, but go home to thy kindred if thou canst. Moreover, wouldst thou fare alone? The others shall hinder thee. Said Walter, I am the master. They shall do as I bid them. Besides, they will be well pleased to share my goods amongst them, if I give them a writing to clear them of all charges which might be brought against them. My son, said the carle, I pray thee go not to thy death. Walter heard him silently, but as if he were persuaded to refrain. And then the old man fell to, and told him much concerning this bear folk and their customs, speaking very freely of them. But Walter's ears were scarce open to this talk, whereas he deemed that he should have naught to do with those wild men, and he durst not ask again concerning the country whereto led the pass on the northward. All right, next chapter. Check that out. Chapter 7. Walter comes to the shard in the rock wall. As they were in converse thus, they heard the hunters blowing on their horns all together. Whereon the old man arose and said, I deem by the blowing that the hunt will be over and done, and that they be blowing on their fellows who have gone scattermeal about the wood. It is now some 5 hours after noon, and thy men will be getting back with their venison, and I will be fainest of the victuals they have caught. Therefore I will hasten on before, and get ready fire and water and other matters for the cooking. Wilt thou come with me, young master, or abide thy men here? Walter said lightly, I will rest and abide them here, since I cannot fail to see them hence as they go on their ways to thine house. And it may be well that I be at hand to command them and forbid, and put some order amongst them. For rough playmates they be, some of them, and now all heated with the hunting and the joy of the green earth. Thus he spoke, as if naught were toward save supper and bed, but inwardly hope and fear were contending in him. And again his heart beat so hard that he deemed that the carle must surely hear it. But the old man took him but according to his outward seeming, and nodded his head, and went away quietly toward his house. When he had been gone a little, Walter rose up heedfully, He had with him a scrip wherein was some cheese and hard fish, and a little flasket of wine. And a short bow he had with him, and a quiver of arrows. And he was girt with a strong and good sword, and a wood knife withal. He looked to all this gear that it was not amiss, and then speedily went down off the mound. And when he was come down, he found that it covered from him men coming out of the wood. And if he went straight thence to that shard of the rock wall where was the pass that led southward. Now it is no nay that thitherward he turned, and went wisely, lest the carle should make a backward cast and see him, or lest any straggler of his own folk might happen upon him. For to say sooth, he deemed that they did wind him. Forsooth, he deemed that did they wind him, they would be like to let him of his journey. He had noted the bearings of the cliffs nigh the shard, and whereas he could see their heads everywhere except from the depths of the thicket, he was not like to go astray. He had made no great way ere he heard the horns blowing all together again in one place. And looking thitherward through the leafy boughs, for he was now amidst of a thicket, he saw his men thronging the mound, and had no doubt therefore that they were blowing on him. But being well under cover, he heeded it not. And lying still a little, saw them go down off the mound, and go all of them toward the carle's house, still blowing as they went, but not faring scattermeal. Wherefore it was clear that they were not troubled about him. So he went on his way to the shard, and there was nothing to say of his journey till he got before it with the last of the clear day, and entered it straightway. It was in a sooth a downright breach or cleft in the rock wall, and there was no hill or bent leading up to it, nothing but a tumble of stones before it, which was somewhat uneasy going, yet needed naught but labour to overcome it. And when he had got over this, and was in the very pass itself, he found it no ill going. Forsooth, at first it was little worse than a rough road betwixt two great stony slopes, though a trickle of water ran down amidst of it. So, though it was so nigh nightfall, yet Walter pressed on, yea, and long after the very night was come. For the moon rose wide and bright a little after nightfall. But at last he had gone so long, and was so wearied, that he deemed it naught but wisdom to rest him, and so lay down on a piece of greensward betwixt the stones, when he had eaten a morsel out of his satchel, and drunk of the water out of the stream. There as he lay, if he had any doubt of peril, his weariness soon made it all one to him, for presently he was sleeping as soundly as any man in Langton-on-Holm. All right, next chapter. Chapter 8. Walter Wends the Waste. Day was yet young when he awoke. He leapt to his feet, and went down to the stream and drank of its waters, and washed the night off him in a pool thereof, and then set forth on his way again. When he had gone some 3 hours, the road, which had been going up all the way, but somewhat gently, grew steeper, and the bent on either side lowered and lowered, till it sank at last altogether. And then he was on a rough mountain neck with little grass and no water, save that now and again was a soft place with a flow amidst of it, and such places he must needs fetch a compass about, lest he be mired. He gave himself but little rest, eating what he needs must as he went. The day was bright and calm, so that the sun was never hidden, and he steered by it due south. All that day he went, and found no more change in that huge neck, save that whiles it was more and whiles less steep. A little before nightfall, he happened on a shallow pool some 20 yards over, and he deemed it good to rest there, since there was water for his avail, though he might have made somewhat more out of the tail end of the day. When dawn came again, he awoke and arose, nor spent much time over his breakfast, but pressed on all he might. And now he said to himself that whatsoever other peril were athwart his way, he was out of the danger of the chase of his own folk. All this while he had seen no four-footed beast, save now and again a hill fox, and once some outlandish kind of hare, and of fowl but very few, a crow or two, a long-winged hawk, and twice an eagle high up aloft. Again, the third night, he slept in the stony wilderness, which still led him up and up. Only toward the end of the day, it seemed that it had been less steep for a long while, otherwise naught was changed. On all sides it was naught but the endless neck, wherefrom naught could be seen, but some other part of itself. This fourth night withal he found no water whereby he might rest, so that he awoke parched, and longing to drink just when the dawn was at its coldest. But on the fifth morrow the ground rose but a little, and at last, when he had been going wearily a long while, and now, hard on noontide, his thirst grieved him sorely, he came upon a spring welling out from under a high rock, the water wherefrom trickled feebly away. So eager was he to drink that at first he heeded naught else. But when his thirst was fully quenched, his eyes caught sight of the stream which flowed from the well. He gave a shout, for lo, it was running south. Wherefore it was with a merry heart that he went on. And as he went came on more streams, all running south or thereabouts. He hastened on all he might, but in despite of all the speed he made, and that he felt the land was now going down southward, night overtook him in that same wilderness. Yet when he stayed at last for sheer weariness, he lay down in what he deemed by the moonlight to be a shallow valley, with a ridge at the southern end thereof. He slept long, and when he awoke the sun was high in the heavens, and never was brighter or clearer morning on the earth than that. He arose and ate of what little was yet left him, and drank of the water of a stream which he had followed the evening before, and beside which he had laid him down, and then set forth again with no great hope to come on new tidings that day. But yet when he was fairly afoot, him seemed that there was something new in the air which he breathed, that was soft and bore sweet scents home to him, whereas heretofore, and that especially for the last 3 or 4 days, it had been harsh and void, like the face of the desert itself. So on he went, and presently was mounting the ridge aforesaid, and, as oft happens when one climbs a steep place, he kept his eyes on the ground, till he felt he was on the top of the ridge. Then he stopped to take breath, and raised his head, and looked, and lo! He was verily on the brow of the great mountain neck, and down below him was the hanging of the great hill slopes which fell down, not slowly, as those he had been those days a mounting, but speedily enough, though with little of broken places or sheer cliffs. But beyond this last of the desert, there was before him a lovely land of wooded hills, green plains, and little valleys, stretching out far and wide, till it ended at last in great blue mountains and white snowy peaks beyond them. Then for very surprise of joy his spirit wavered, and he felt faint and dizzy, so that he was fain to sit down a while and cover his face with his hands. Presently he came to his sober mind again, and stood up and looked forth keenly, and saw no sign of any dwelling of man. But he said to himself that might well be because the good and well-grassed land was still so far off, and that he might yet look to find men and their dwellings when he had left the mountain wilderness quite behind him. So therewith he fell to going his ways down the mountain, and lost little time therein, whereas he now had his livelihood to look to. All right, continuing. Chapter 9. Walter happeneth on the first of those 3 creatures. What with one thing, what with another, as his having to turn out of his way for sheer rocks, or for slopes so steep that he might not try the peril of them, and again for bogs impassable, he was fully 3 days more before he had quite come out of the stony waste, and by that time, though he had never lacked water, his scanty victual was quite done. for all his careful husbandry thereof. But this troubled him little, whereas he looked to find wild fruits here and there, and shoot some small deer, as hare or coney, and make a shift to cook the same, since he had with him flint and fire steel. Moreover, the further he went, the surer he was that he should soon come across a dwelling, so smooth and fair as everything looked before him. And he had scant fear, save that he might happen upon men who should enthrall him. But when he was come down past the first green slopes, he was so worn that he said to himself that rest was better than meat, so little as he had slept for the last 3 days. So he laid him down under an ash tree by a stream side, nor asked what was o'clock, but had his fill of sleep. And even when he awoke in the fresh morning, was little fain of rising, but lay betwixt sleeping and waking for some 3 hours more. Then he arose, and went further down the next green bent, yet somewhat slowly because of his hunger weakness. And the scent of that fair land came up to him like the odor of one great nosegay. So he came to where the land was level, and there were many trees, as oak and ash and sweet chestnut and wych elm and hornbeam and quicken tree, not glowing in a close wood or tangled thicket, but set as though in order on the flowery greensward, even as it might be in a great king's park. So he came to a big bird cherry, whereof many boughs hung low down laden with fruit. His belly rejoiced at the sight, and he caught hold of a bough, and fell to plucking and eating. But whiles he was amidst of this, he heard suddenly, close anigh him, a strange noise of roaring and braying, not very great, but exceeding fierce and terrible, and not like the voice of any beast that he knew. As has been aforesaid, Walter was no faint heart. But what with the weakness of his travail and hunger, what with the strangeness of his adventure and his loneliness, his spirit failed him. He turned round towards the noise. His knees shook, and he trembled. This way and that he looked, and then gave a great cry and tumbled down in a swoon. For close before him, at his very feet, was the dwarf whose image he had seen before, clad in his yellow coat, and grinning up at him from his hairy countenance. How long he lay there as one dead he knew not. But when he awoke, again there was the dwarf sitting on his hams close by him. And when he lifted up his head, the dwarf sent out that fearful harsh voice again, but this time Walter could make out words therein, and knew that the creature spoke, and said, "How now? What art thou? Whence comest? What wantest?" Walter sat up and said, "I am a man. I hight Golden Walter. I come from Langton. I want victual." Said the dwarf, writhing his face grievously, and laughing forsooth, "I know it all. I asked thee to see what wise thou wouldst lie. I was sent forth to look for thee, and I have brought thee loathsome bread with me, such as ye aliens must needs eat. Take it." Therewith he drew a loaf from a satchel which he bore, and thrust it towards Walter, who took it somewhat doubtfully for all his hunger. The dwarf yelled at him, "Art thou dainty, alien? Wouldst thou have flesh? Well, give me thy bow and an arrow or two, since thou art lazy sick, and I will get thee a coney or a hare, or a quail maybe. Ah, I forgot thou art dainty, and will not eat flesh as I do, blood and all together, but must needs half burn it in the fire, or mar it with hot water, as they say my lady does, or as the wretch, the thing, does. I know that, for I have seen it eating." "Nay," said Walter, "this sufficeth." And he fell to eating the bread, which was sweet between his teeth. Then, when he had eaten a while, for hunger compelled him, he said to the dwarf, "But what meanest thou by the wretch and the thing? And what lady is thy lady?" The creature let out another wordless roar as of furious anger, and then the words came, "It hath a face white and red like to thine, and hands white as thine, yea, but whiter. And the like it is underneath its raiment, only whiter still. For I have seen it. Yes, I have seen it. Ah, yes, and yes, and yes." And therewith his words ran into gibber and yelling, and he rolled about and smote at the grass. But in a while he grew quiet again, and sat still, and then fell to laughing horribly again, and then said, But thou, fool, wilt think it fair if thou fallest into its hands, and wilt repent it thereafter as I did. Oh, the mocking and jibes of it, and the tears and shrieks of it, and the knife! What sayest thou of my lady? What lady? O alien, what other lady is there? And what shall I tell thee of her? It is like that she made me, as she made the bear men. But she made not the wretch, the thing, and she hateth it sorely as I do. And some day to come, thereat he brake off, and fell to wordless yelling a long while, and thereafter spake all panting, Now I have told thee overmuch, and oh, if my lady come to hear thereof, now I will go. And therewith he took out 2 more loaves from his wallet, and tossed them to Walter, and so turned and went his ways, whiles walking upright, as Walter had seen his image on the quay of Langton, whiles bounding and rolling like a ball thrown by a lad, whiles scuttling along on all fours like an evil beast, and ever and anon giving forth that harsh and evil cry. Walter sat a while after he was out of sight, so stricken with horror and loathing and fear of he knew not what, that he might not move. Then he plucked up a heart, and looked to his weapons, and put the other loaves into his scrip. Then he arose, and went his ways wondering, yea, and dreading, what kind of creature he should next fall in with. For soothly it seemed to him that it would be worse than death if they were all such as this one, and if that were so, he must needs slay and be slain. Damn, Walter. All right. Last chapter for tonight. 10. Chapter 10. Walter happeneth on another creature in the strange land. But as he went on through the fair and sweet land so bright and sunlitten, and he now rested and fed, the horror and fear ran off from him, and he wandered on merrily. Neither did aught befall him save the coming of night, when he laid him down under a great spreading oak with his drawn sword ready to hand, and fell asleep at once, and woke not till the sun was high. Then he arose and went on his way again, and the land was no worser than yesterday, but even better, it might be, the greensward more flowery, the oaks and chestnuts greater. Deer of divers kinds he saw, and might easily have got his meat thereof, but he meddled not with them since he had his bread, and was timorous of lighting a fire. Withal he doubted little of having some entertainment. Oh, what happened to my thing? That's weird. Anyway. Where was I? He doubted little of having some entertainment, and that might be not evil, since even that fearful dwarf had been courteous to him after his kind, and had done him good and not harm. But of the happening on the wretch and the thing whereof the dwarf spake, he was yet somewhat afeard. After he had gone a while, and when as the summer morn was at its brightest, he saw a little way ahead a grey rock rising up from amidst a ring of oak trees. So he turned thither straight away, for in this plain land he had seen no rocks heretofore. And as he went, he saw that there was a fountain gushing out from under the rock, which ran thence in a fair little stream. And when he had the rock and the fountain and the stream clear before him, lo, a child of Adam sitting beside the fountain under the shadow of the rock. He drew a little nigher, and then he saw that it was a woman, clad in green like the sward whereon she lay. And she was playing with the welling out of the water, and she had trussed up her sleeves to the shoulder, that she might thrust her bare arms therein. Her shoes of black leather lay on the grass beside her, and her feet and legs yet shone with the brook. Belike amidst the splashing and clatter of the water, she did not hear him drawing nigh. so that he was close to her before she lifted up her face and saw him, and he beheld her, that it was the maiden of the thrice-seen pageant. She reddened when she saw him, and hastily covered up her legs with her gown-skirt, and drew down the sleeves over her arms, but otherwise stirred not. As for him, he stood still, striving to speak to her, but no word might he bring out, and his heart beat sorely. But the maiden spake to him in a clear, sweet voice, wherein was now no trouble. Thou art an alien, art thou not? For I have not seen thee before. Yea, he said, I am an alien. Wilt thou be good to me? She said, And why not? I was afraid at first, for I thought it had been the king's son. I looked to see none other, for of goodly men he has been the only one here in this land a long while till thy coming. He said, Didst thou look for my coming at about this time? Oh, nay, she said, How might I? Said Walter, I wot not, but the other man seemed to be looking for me, and knew of me, and he brought me bread to eat. She looked on him anxiously, and grew somewhat pale, as she said, What other one? Now Walter did not know what the dwarf might be to her, fellow servant or what not, so he would not show his loathing of him, but answered wisely, The little man in the yellow raiment. But when she heard that word, she went suddenly very pale, and leaned her head aback, and beat the air with her hands, but said presently in a faint voice, I pray thee talk not of that one while I am by, nor even think of him, if thou mayst forbear. He spake not, and she was a little while before she came to herself again. Then she opened her eyes, and looked upon Walter, and smiled kindly on him, as though to ask his pardon for having scared him. Then she rose up in her place, and stood before him, and they were nigh together, for the stream betwixt them was little. But he still looked anxiously upon her, and said, Have I hurt thee? I pray thy pardon. She looked on him more sweetly still, and said, O nay, thou wouldst not hurt me, thou? Then she blushed very red, and he in likewise. But afterwards she turned pale, and laid a hand on her breast, and Walter cried out hastily, O me, I have hurt thee again. Wherein have I done amiss? In naught, she said. But I am troubled. I wot not wherefore. Some thought hath taken hold of me, and I know it not. Mayhappen in a little while I shall know what troubles me. Now I bid thee depart from me a little, and I will abide here. And when thou comest back, it will either be that I have found it out or not, and in either case I will tell thee. She spoke earnestly to him, but he said, How long shall I abide away? Her face was troubled as she answered him, For no long while. He smiled on her, and turned away, and went a space to the other side of the oak trees, whence she was still within eye-shot. There he abode until the time seemed long to him, but he schooled himself and forbore, for he said, Lest she send me away again. So he abided again until the time seemed long to him. And she called not to him, but once again he forbore to go. Then at last he arose, and his heart beat, and he trembled, and he walked back again speedily, and came to the maiden, who was still standing by the rock of the spring, her arms hanging down, her eyes downcast. She looked up at him as he drew nigh, and her face changed with eagerness as she said, I am glad thou art come back, though it be no long while since thy departure. Sooth to say, it was scarce half an hour in all. Nevertheless, I have been thinking many things, and thereof I will now tell thee. He said, Maiden, there is a river betwixt us, though it be no big one. Shall I not stride over and come to thee, that we may sit down together side by side on the green grass? Nay, she said, not yet. Tarry a while till I have told thee of matters. I must now tell thee of my thoughts in order. Her color went and came now, as she plaited the folds of her gown with restless fingers. At last she said, Now the first thing is this, that though thou hast seen me first only within this hour, thou hast set thine heart upon me, to have me for thy speech friend and thy darling. And if this be not so, then is all my speech, yea, and all my hope, come to an end at once. Oh, yea, said Walter, even so it is. But how thou hast found this out I wot not, since now for the first time I say it, that thou art indeed my love, and my dear, and my darling. Hush, she said, hush, lest the wood have ears, and thy speech is loud. Abide, and I shall tell thee how I know it. Whether this thy love shall outlast the first time that thou holdest my body in thine arms I wot not, nor dost thou. But sore is my hope that it may be so. For I also, though it be but scarce an hour since I set eyes on thee, have cast mine eyes on thee to have thee for my love and my darling and my speech friend. And this is how I wot that thou lovest me, my dear, my friend. Now is all this dear and joyful, and overflows my heart with sweetness. But now I must tell thee of the fear and the evil which lieth behind it. Then Walter stretched out his hands to her, and cried out, Yea, yea, but whatever evil entangle us, now we both know these two things, to wit, that thou lovest me, and I thee, wilt thou not come hither that I might cast mine arms about thee, and kiss thee, if not thy kind lips, or thy friendly face at all, yet at least thy dear hand, yea, that I may touch thy body in some wise? She looked on him steadily, and said softly, Nay, this above all things must not be, and that it may not be is a part of the evil which entangles us. But hearken, friend, once again I tell thee that thy voice is over loud in this wilderness fruitful of evil. Now I have told thee indeed of two things whereof we both wot. But next I must needs tell thee of things whereof I wot, and thou wottest not. Yet this were better, that thou pledge thy word not to touch so much as one of my hands, and that we go together a little way hence away from these tumbled stones, and sit down upon the open greensward, whereas here is cover if there be spying abroad. Again, as she spoke, she turned very pale, but Walter said, Since it must be so, I pledge thee my word as I did. I pledge thee my word to thee as I love thee. And therewith she knelt down, and did on her footgear, and then sprang lightly over the rivulet. And then the twain of them went side by side some half a furlong thence, and sat down, shadowed by the boughs of a slim quicken tree, growing up out of the greensward, whereon for a good space around was neither bush nor brake. There began the maiden to talk soberly, and said, This is what I must needs say to thee now, that thou art come into a land perilous for any one that loveth aught of good, from which, forsooth, I were fain that thou wert gotten away safely, even though I should die of longing for thee. As for myself, my peril is, in a measure, less than thine, I mean the peril of death. But lo, thou, this iron on my foot is token that I am a thrall, and thou knowest in what wise thralls must pay for transgressions. Furthermore, of what I am, and how I came hither, time would fail me to tell, but some while, maybe, I shall tell thee. I serve an evil mistress, of whom I may say that scarce I wot if she be a woman or not, but by some creatures she is accounted for a god, and as a god is harried, and surely never god was crueler nor colder than she. Me she hateth sorely, yet if she hated me little or naught, small were the gain to me if it were her pleasure to deal hardly by me. But as things now are, and are like to be, it would not be for her pleasure, but for her pain and loss to make an end of me. Therefore, as I said e'en now, my mere life is not in peril with her, unless perchance some sudden passion get the better of her, and she slay me and repent of it thereafter. For so it is, that if it be the least evil of her conditions that she is wanton, at least wanton she is to the letter. Many a time hath she cast the net for the catching of some goodly young man, and her latest prey, save it be thou, is the young man whom I named, when first I saw thee, by the name of the king's son. He is with us yet, and I fear him, for of late hath he wearied of her, though it is but plain truth to say of her that she is the wonder of all beauties of the world. He hath wearied of her, I say, and hath cast his eyes upon me, and if I were heedless, he would betray me to the uttermost wrath of my mistress. For needs must I say of him, though he be a goodly man, and now fallen into thraldom, that he hath no bowels of compassion, but is a dastard, who for an hour's pleasure would undo me, and thereafter would stand by smiling, and taking my mistress's pardon with good cheer, while for me would be no pardon. Seest thou, therefore, how it is with me between these two cruel fools? And moreover, there are others of whom I will not even speak to thee. And therewith she put her hands before her face, and wept, and murmured, Who shall deliver me from death in this life? But Walter cried out, For what else am I come hither? I. And it was a near thing that he did not take her in his arms, but he remembered his pledged word, and drew back from her in terror, whereas he had an inkling of why she would not suffer it, and he wept with her. But suddenly the maid left weeping, and said in a changed voice, Friend, whereas thou speakest of delivering me, it is more like that I shall deliver thee. And now I pray thy pardon for thus grieving thee with my grief, and that more especially because thou mayst not solace my grief with kisses and caresses. But so it was, that for once I was smitten by the thought of the anguish of this land, and the joy of all the world besides. Therewith she caught her breath in a half-sob, but refrained her and went on. Now, dear friend and darling, take good heed to all that I shall say to thee, whereas thou must do after the teaching of my words. First, I deem, by the monster having met thee at the gates of the land, and refreshed thee, the mistress hath looked for thy coming, nay, by thy coming hither at all, that she hath cast her net, and caught thee. Hast thou noted aught that might seem to make this more like? Said Walter. 3 times in full daylight I have seen go past me the images of the monster and thee and the glorious lady, even as if you were alive. And therewith he told her in a few words how it had gone with him since that day on the quay at Langton. She said, Then it is no longer perhaps, but certain, that thou art her latest catch. And even so I deemed from the first. And, dear friend, this is why I have not suffered thee to kiss or caress me, so sore as I longed for thee. For the mistress will have thee for her only, and hath lured thee hither for naught else. And she is wise in wizardry, even as some deal am I. And wert thou to touch me with hand or mouth on my naked flesh, yea, or were it even on my raiment, then she would scent the savour of thy love upon me, and then, though it may be she would spare thee, she would not spare me. Then she was silent a little, and seemed very downcast, and Walter held his peace from grief and helplessness. For of wizardry he knew naught. At last the maiden spake again, and said, Nevertheless, we will not die reedless. Now thou must look to this, that from henceforward it is thee, and not the king's son, whom she desireth, and that so much the more that she hath not set eyes on thee. Remember this, whatsoever her seeming may be to thee. Now, therefore, shall the king's son be free, though he know it not, to cast his love on whomso he will, and, in a way, I also shall be free to yea say him. Though, forsooth, so fulfilled is she with malice and spite, that even then she may turn round on me to punish me for doing that which she would have me do. Now let me think of it. Then she was silent a good while, and spoke at last. Yea, all things are perilous, and a perilous rede I have thought of, whereof I will not tell thee as yet, so waste not the short while by asking me. At least the worst will be no worse than what shall come if we strive not against it. And now, my friend, amongst perils it is growing more and more perilous that we twain should be longer together. But I would say one thing yet, and maybe another thereafter. Thou hast cast thy love upon one who will be true to thee, whatsoever may befall. Yet is she a guileful creature, and might not help it her life long, and now, for thy very sake, must needs be more guileful now than ever before. As for me, the guileful, my love I have cast upon a lovely man, and one true and simple, and a stout heart, but at such a pinch is he, that if he withstand all temptation, his withstanding may belike undo both him and me. Therefore swear we both of us, that by both of us shall all guile and all falling away be forgiven on the day when we shall be free to love each the other as our hearts will. Walter cried out, O love, I swear it indeed. Thou art my hallow, and I will swear it as on the relics of a hallow. On thy hands and on thy feet I swear it. The words seemed to her a dear caress, and she laughed, and blushed, and looked full kindly on him. And then her face grew solemn, and she said, On thy life I swear it. Then she said, Now there is naught for thee to do but go hence straight to the golden house, which is my mistress's house, and the only house in this land, save one which I may not see, and lieth southward no long way. How she will deal with thee I wot not, but all I have said of her and thee and the king's son is true. Therefore I say to thee, be wary and cold at heart, whatsoever outward semblance thou mayest make. If thou have to yield thee to her, then yield rather late than early, so as to gain time. Yet not so late as to seem shamed in yielding for fear's sake. Hold fast to thy life, my friend, for in warding that, thou wardest me from grief without remedy. Thou wilt see me ere long. It may be tomorrow, it may be some days hence. But forget not that what I may do, that I am doing. Take heed also that thou pay no more heed to me, or rather less, if thou wert meeting a maiden of no account in the streets of thine own town. O my love, barren is this first farewell, as was our first meeting. But surely shall there be another meeting better than the first, and the last farewell may be long and long yet. Therewith she stood up, and he knelt before her a little while without any word, and then arose and went his ways. But when he had gone a space, he turned about, and saw her standing in the same place. She stayed a moment when she saw him turn, and then herself turned about. So he departed through the fair land, and his heart was full with hope and fear as he went. All right, that would be on the world, chapters 6 through 10. We'll pick it up next time with chapter 11. Only on, always on. Good night, Cable 2.